So I am currently the CEO of Boardable. We're a software company for nonprofit boards. And before that, I ran Smallbox. My wife runs that company now. And along the way, I started Musical Family Tree. And I really appreciate Josh and the team promoting MFT and donating the profits from this event. Josh has just been a wonderful supporter. I think we just need to give Josh a round of applause for doing all this. The city's much better because we've got a Josh Baker in it. Could we just go, each of you just quickly introduce yourself, a little bit of what you do, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Hi, I'm Robert Meitus, and I live in Bloomington, but I've had an office here for years, about 15 years. We are moving our office, our main office, to Bloomington in the fall, and we have a small New York office as well. I'm an entertainment attorney with about 5 attorneys in our firm, and we represent everybody. It's Meitus, Gelbert, Rose, and represent everybody from Cage the Elephant and older acts like Third Eye Blind, and Alan Parsons Project, to newer acts like Foxygen, with Sufjan Stevens and Asthmatic Kitty Records. We work with Joyful Noise, John Prine, on and on. So we're mainly music attorneys. I also teach at the Maurer School of Law in Bloomington, and I'm married to Carrie Newcomer, a folk musician.
I'm Sarah Meyer. I'm the VP of Marketing at the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra. I graduated from Butler and then was at Nuvo in marketing and promotions for about 5 years. So it's awesome to see people like Oreo, who I remember going to one of his first concerts. But went to the Symphony after that. I've been there for 7 years. And I oversee all the marketing we do about 180 concerts a year. And ticket sales around 11 million. So we are a nonprofit organization, so we're supported solely pretty much by ticket sales and fundraising, donations, grants, and the city.
Dan Kemmer with Live Nation Indiana. I oversee all the booking for Live Nation in the marketplace. So everything you see out at Ruoff or the Lawn at White River, our 3 venues over at the Marat, and work with Jason, who's here from the Vogue, the folk up at the Palladium, and really started 25 years ago in marketing and worked my way up, and in addition to Indiana, oversee all of our club and theater division for House of Blues. So it was really interesting to hear some of the different stories about Cincinnati, where we have some venues, and completely agree with Katie what they've got going on there, what's happening in Chicago, what's happening in Cleveland, and there really is this sort of, I'm seeing it in a lot of markets where there is that pride. You see, even in Indianapolis, everyone with their 317 shirts, you know, Cleveland, same thing, what they're doing. So just happy to be here, and you know, this is a great forum. Looking forward to it.
My name is Carl Hofstetter. I am the founder and curator at Joyful Noise Recordings, which is a record label based here in Fountain Square, like 2 blocks that way. And we represent something like 30 or 40 bands at any given time, and release maybe, I don't know, 40 records a year, something like that. No, maybe more like 30. But we have a really diverse roster of bands, mostly from not local bands, but we're all still based here, as well as in Brooklyn.
Great, thanks everyone. The concept of the nightmare, or the nightmare, however you want to say it, really intrigued me from Shane's opening comments, and I wanted to put this out to the group of you. What's your reaction to the idea of having that live music czar, or somebody on a city official level who's thinking about the live music on a systemic level, that reactionary role, the gig economy, all those elements? Do we need that, and what benefit would it bring the city if we had it?
You know what, I thought it was interesting when they're talking about it. I do like the idea, whether it's a nightmare or just someone at the city level. I was listening to Oreo. I can't even imagine him walking in to the city 2 years ago and saying, I want to do a rap fest. Where do you even start? So, you know, if there is someone like that, whether it's the nightmare for the different venues, and not just the live venues, but, you know, there's a lot of other venues in town that, you know, we were talking earlier, you know, there's the hard ticket shows, and then there's the parties that you see over at Slippery Noodle or over on the patio at the Rathskeller. If there's a question, someone should be able to go talk to someone in the city.
I think too it would open up collaboration and ideas for collaboration, because sometimes there's the awesome part that we've seen about Indianapolis is it's grown so much, and there's so much more to do than there was just 5 years ago. But sometimes it's like, wow, there are 5 different events on this night, and I wonder if they were talking, could something else have been figured out so all of these events can be successful and all of these musicians can be heard. So I think if there was one person who was kind of overseeing all that, it might help.
I mean, I would just generally like to see like a shift in perspective of Indianapolis supporting culture the same way it supports like physical infrastructure, you know, and realizing that things like shows bring in money, and on multiple levels.
So thinking about building a local music scene, one of the things I've thought a lot about through the years is how do you build a local fan base for original music? That's something I think this city's really struggled with through the years. And related to that, it's been a long time since we've really had a breakout artist from Indianapolis or the Indiana area. If you think about what's happening, we talk about Ohio, Walk the Moon, the 21 Pilots. There's been a lot of bands in the Midwest break out, and doing that by building a local fan base and leveraging that regionally as they grow. Why are we not seeing that here in Indianapolis, and what's the missing ingredients for that?
I'll start. I think it really starts with the artist. I mean, it's got to be a drive that they have. I mean, those bands that you talked about didn't just all of a sudden pop up. We talk about 21 Pilots, and it's a really great artist development story for this market, not just out of Cincinnati, but a lot of people know that they headlined Banker's Life last year. Well, what they don't remember is they played Deluxe twice, they sold out the Egyptian, they sold out the Lawn, and then they got to Banker's Life. So really, it's, I always, we talk about passion, patience, and persistence. You got to have a passion for what you want to do, you got to have the patience because it's not going to be overnight, and you got to be knocking on doors all the time. I can count on, there's probably about 15 to 20 locals that I hear from over and over for opportunities at any of our shows. It's persistence, and they may only get 1 gig a year out of it. They might get 4 gigs, but you got to be persistent.
Are we missing hustle? Is that what we're missing?
I think persistence is hustle. Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely what I see mostly in other cities is are bands that are willing to really go out there and, tour in ways that, I don't really see from bands here. But I think another thing is that it feels like a lot of, I want to say this in a nice way, a lot of bands seem to be more cultural followers than they are cultural inventors. And I think that we could, I'd really like to see a lot, more bands here that were really trying to do something new with music.
So I live in Bloomington and have been part of that community for many decades. And there used to be Second Story. Any of you remember that? A club. And we don't have that anymore, but we do have the Blockhouse and the Bishop, which seem to be, they're fine. I don't want to downmouth those efforts at clubs, but they don't seem to have the energy that Second Story had. Still got the Bluebird, but that energy in the 90s when I came was much higher. So there's the club scene. There's also that, when that spark occurs, you want the business community, the promoters to have an act that has that spark onto an opening spot. You hopefully have some lawyers and managers and people around them that can take them to the next level. But you have to have that creative spark. So when a Blake Babies comes out or somebody is ready, that you launch them and they don't leave. And so I think on a positive note, as we build clubs, like the Hi-Fi is a great new, larger addition to the community here in Indianapolis, and we build those clubs in Bloomington and here. And we'll talk more about what's happening down there with the parks and this new Performing Arts Center in Nashville. And all those things get built. I think we raise funds and incentives for these bands to do better. I think we raise the chance. We don't guarantee success, but we raise the chance that somebody will break out. And then you get an REM and a B-52s, and all of a sudden we're in Athens.
And not just break out, but not leave when they do break.
And not leave.
How important are all ages venues? You know, if you think about the overall ecosystem, as artists come up, as we talk about building a fan base as well, how important are they, and how healthy is our all ages ecosystem here, and what can we do to build it up?
I'll start. One of the things when I moved here from Ohio, really was surprised about the 21 plus in a lot of different spaces. Deluxe didn't exist. You know, you had the Hoosier Dome doing some things. So I think everyone here can remember, you know, the bands you grew up with in high school and college, 18 to 21. Those are the ones that are still in my record collection or my cassette collection. I'm that old. But you really need to have that opportunity. And you know, we opened up Deluxe 3 years ago, and we're doing 60 to 70 shows there. The Hoosier Dome is doing some great business. You know, it really is, you need to have those opportunities, and you know, I'm not versed enough in the liquor laws in the state to figure out why some places can and some can't, but you've got to have those all ages opportunities, because that's where the kids are developing their tastes.
Let's talk about liquor laws for a second. I know that's something that we discussed earlier. Are Indiana's liquor laws holding back the music scene in a fundamental way?
I think so.
So,
well, just from my perspective, there are lots of our artists who just refuse to play 21 and up shows, and they just won't tour through Indianapolis because there isn't a room like this that is all ages.
what can we do about it? You're the lawyer, Robert. How do we fix this?
I specifically have the email to you that said I know nothing about liquor laws.
I know that. That's why I'm teasing you.
Well, I would say the obvious answer is lobby, and it'll take 50 years. Like we just started drinking on Sundays last month. So
I've been drinking on Sundays.
Well, the bishop found a nice loophole though in Bloomington.
Yeah, what's the loophole?
I think, I mean, I don't know anything about the specific laws, but there's a divider, you know, like you can, so it's not all ages, it's 18 and up, but that's still a lot better, you know, and there's a different door for the people that are under 21, or like, you know, there's the same front door, but then the under 21 people go this way direct to the stage, and then the 21 people can go into this other room where there's the bar, but you can still take the beer into watch the show.
I will say on the all ages end too, just from my experience with the Hilbert Circle Theater, I mean, we have over 10,000 students that come to our concerts each year, which is amazing. And it gives them the opportunity to experience music, and I think that we need to be doing more of that, whether it's a club or a theater or any of that, because a lot of the music education is starting to lack, and they're getting their involvement with music through attending shows. So we need to be better at making that available. So we've seen how that can help students and kids, and I think it has to be a priority.
Robert, in Bloomington, they're doing some interesting things. The city's making some moves down there, and I think in Nashville, they're doing some similar things. What do you see them doing? Can you give us an update on that? And then can you share a little bit of your thoughts on what they're doing right and wrong in terms of like how could it be improved if Indianapolis were to look at that model?
Sure. So there's a few things that I'm a part of in different ways that I'll just kind of run down, and maybe everybody can comment on this if you have thoughts. So there's the Switchyard Park. That is a 57-acre park that Sean Starwitz knows very much about. He's part of the City of Bloomington and the Arts Initiative. And the reason I bring that up is because it's a $34 million park with a skateboard park. It's not music, is it? There's basketball, food vending area for our city market to move over there, farmers market, a dog park, but there's also a stage. Hundreds of thousands of dollars is being spent on an amphitheater, and they brought in early musicians and audio people to talk about what was needed there, and a smaller venue as well. So 2 venues that are thought to be physical structures for music to be played. I would say they also need to think about who they're going to pay and where the funding is going to come. That's something we were talking about, not just building it, but funding arts to perform. because musicians are always the last thought, who's going to pay them? Okay, then in Nashville, there's $13+ million being put into the Maple Leaf Performing Arts Center, which Dan can speak a little bit about. He knew about it before I did. I'm representing them now, and have just begun to. I can tell you it's the innkeeper's tax is helping to fund it, but a private loan is the large part of it, a municipal loan to the municipality. It's different than the TIF funding, but that's also purely an entertainment and mainly a musical venue that will hold nearly 2,000 people in Nashville. Okay, that's the second thing. The third thing I would bring up is the Bloomington Convention Center, an increase in taxes of 2%, I believe, or 3%. Sean, what is it? 1%. That's what we got, right? There'll be a component of that, which will be increased capacity for music and entertainment. There's direct incentives, a fourth thing, to a bicentennial song project, where they're giving a grant for somebody to write a song, and on and on and on. The parks programming in Bloomington is very strong, and they get sponsors and they fund music directly. So down in Bloomington and Nashville, I think there is an emphasis on physical structure and spending, if you look at the $40 million that's being devoted to that. But there's also a thought that we need to pay the musicians to come in and perform and incentivize the arts through commitments from the city. You know, direct subsidies, or there can be waivers of zoning restrictions, et cetera. There's a very active discussion happening down there.
So we've kind of talked around this a little bit, but there's going to be funding that needs to come in. There's a funding gap right now for the music ecosystem, if you will, whether it's more funding for venues or for different programs or organizations. Where is that funding? Where should that funding come from? Tax dollars? Should we go knock on the Lilly Endowment's door? Where do we get the money? Where do we find that funding? Where should it come from?
Well, Lilly Endowment is amazing and supports the city. I mean, we are so lucky to have Lilly, I have to say that. I think we could find other opportunities. I was talking to you guys a little bit earlier, but I'm not sure if everyone knows, but our income tax goes to the city that we live in, not the city that we work in. So Indianapolis has 185,000 people commuting downtown every day for work, and we are not seeing all those income tax dollars, which go to our city and which could help fund the arts and some of these programs. But the city has a lot of other things to fund, so when it's coming to budgeting time, we're not seeing as much of that money that could go to some of these programs. So I think that's a big problem. I think other cities have found different ways to do this. Being a Cleveland person, they have a cigarette tax, actually. So 30 cents of every pack of cigarettes goes to the arts in Cuyahoga County. What's funny is that they saw a huge bump in funding, and now more people are quitting smoking, so they're not seeing as much money to the arts. But it's that kind of stuff that, could we find other creative ways to fund? Because I think, I definitely agree, where we get funding for these structures, which is amazing. We need more venues, we need more places for people to perform, but we have to think about the artists. And I know Katie McGinnis, she's our Director of Artistic Planning at the ISO, and we talk about artists that we want all the time, and we say, but it would be a huge risk, and we're a nonprofit, and to take a risk on some of these bands who would sound amazing with an orchestra, but are they gonna sell all the seats? We need more of that support to be able to get some of these artists in and do something really risky and really new for the city and make a statement. But again, we need the funding.
So throwing it to Dan, what about the private partnership that your organization can do with, I know it's not a done deal or anything, but there have been discussions with like the Performing Arts Center. And if you can speak to other areas that you've worked with municipalities, so that I know
we don't get any funding. We are a for-profit. We make our living.
How can you
tickets.
work with, like, we build a park or
right.
we build an amphitheater? Then how can
I think
we bridge the gap?
Some of the things that we're working on. Look at the Palladium up in Carmel. It's again funded for a lot of their symphonic things. they brought us on to go ahead and help them with the contemporary stuff. So when you look at their schedule over the past year and a half, a lot of the contemporary stuff is actually shows that we've brought to them, whether it's, you know, Straight No Chaser or Diana Krall or Jane Lynch, or we have Dennis Miller there next Friday. So that was an organization that looked at it and say, how can we go ahead and get a little bit more into that for-profit model?
Are you the promoter of those shows?
Yeah, we are the promoter for those
You
shows.
just don't book them, but your money is
We help them
behind
book and
that show.
promote, correct. Okay. So one of the things that we're looking at down at Maple Leaf is some sort of, you know, there's no black and white, lots of gray. And the conversations we're having down there is, can we help them get on the map? Because touring, more and more artists have so many different opportunities at the national level. But what we can do for the regional, what can we do for, Bloomington and Columbus? There's a great art scene down there, whether it's music, arts, crafts. We're not the guys to go ahead and, you know, book that venue 200 nights a year because you want to have it full. And it's interesting for that particular venue, it's really the tourism that is driving that. It's their bed taxes and everything that are paying for that, and they're looking at it. They're not looking at the music as the reason to come into town. They're looking at that as, you know, this is one activity that makes visiting Brown County attractive. So they've got a different model. I think here for Indianapolis, when you're talking about these different, you know, you solve the all ages question really quickly when you can be doing these out in public spaces. Whether it's the small stage here in Fountain Square, you're seeing a lot of these venues in the suburbs, and I know Bob is here from up in Fishers. You know, they're doing a lot of activity at the Nickel Creek Amphitheater. There's one being built in Westwood, Noblesville. They've got a great space over there too. So it's just finding the funding, you know, and you really don't want to make everything a hard ticket because you want to be able to bring the kids and the family and for the education side.
We've been you know, pretty good at detailing the things that need to be improved with the live music ecosystem. What are some of the strengths that the Central Indiana area in particular, if we can go to the Bloomington, the Muncie area, has as a music ecosystem, especially with the live music? What do we have to build on? Obviously, we're sitting on the stage of one of its strengths right now. This has been an absolutely wonderful addition to the live music scene here. What are some of the characteristics, maybe the things that make us unique as a community that we can build on as we continue to move forward with promoting live music and building local fan bases?
I think one of the strengths that's happened just in the last couple of years has been the development of this neighborhood and the fact that we've got like 4 small-sized venues like right on this block. I think like having venues that are, you know, somewhere between like 50 and 200 people or something is, I think, hugely beneficial for, you know, local bands to have a place to play, but also smaller touring bands that might only draw 50 or 100 people this time that they come through town, but, you know, it might be like absolutely blow up in a year. And having them establish some roots here at that young stage and like develop, you know, relationships with bands potentially could be huge. So, and that's something that like it seems like the venues are you know, getting up to speed, I guess.
You know, from a geographical perspective, and this is both for touring artists and for local artists, and we talk about sort of that hub, you know, you work on the 60-mile radius and then you slide out to the 90 and 120. Geographically, Indianapolis is probably one of the best situated markets, even more so than Nashville. I mean, you are 2 hours from Louisville, 2 hours from Cincy, 4 hours from St. Louis. You know, you're 4.5 hours from Detroit, and 5 hours from Cleveland. Indy is on every routing on the national level, whether it's going east to west or north to south. For local or regional bands that want to kind of play in that same sandbox, I mean, they should be focusing. If they don't have a band that they're trading dates with in Cincinnati or Louisville or Chicago every 3 months, that's the first thing they should be looking at.
Quick question for you following up on that. How do we get more local bands opening up for these touring national bands to expose them to their audiences?
Patience, passion, persistence.
Broken record, I love it.
I think VisitIndy has done a really great job at promoting the city and getting people here. And I mean, I think over the past couple of years, I mean, we've had some really huge conventions and events that have happened here. And I mean, if you're not a part of the city in the next 4 years with all of these events that we have coming with the Final Four and the NBA All-Star Game, I mean, we should be planning for those things now. I mean, and how we're going to elevate the city through those. But I think that the overall culture and promotion of the city as a whole just helps all of us. So, and I think everyone's done a really great job at really elevating Indianapolis. So I think this is, I mean, and this is a great thing today to have too, because I think there's a big momentum going on, and I think we need to figure out how to keep going with that.
I did want to go ahead. The 3 Ps are definitely important, but one of the things that everyone should note also is it's not just Live Nation you want to be looking at. You've got guys in here. Jason King at the Vogue also runs Indie Mojo, the Mousetrap. You've got JR over here for Dolly Presents in the Metal World. Everyone knows Josh and Spencer for MOKB Presents. We've got some of the best indie promoters in this town, and if you've got 50 fans, they'll find a show for you. So I'm talking to these guys.
Huge.
I'm talking to these guys every day, or we're emailing every day. You know, dig in, learn the folk in your town. But you've got you're really lucky. There's a lot of markets that are not like that.
I want to make sure we open up to any questions you might want to ask the panel. We've touched on a lot of topics. I've got plenty of questions I can go through. If you have a question you want to ask, feel free to raise your hand. I'll mix you in here. I know we've got, another 10 minutes? 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Great. So feel free to jump in. In terms of thinking back to sort of the next generation, because we always have to think about them today to have it relevant tomorrow. What can we do to really build a generation of songwriters? In the sense that if you think about what live music really thrives on, there's 2 kinds of live music, to generalize. You have original music and you have cover music. And I don't mean to use that in a negative sense, but even the symphony is cover music in many senses, of playing compositions that have been written by someone else. Both very important parts of the music scene. I think often the way a city gets on the map is through the original music that's coming out of that city, which then distinguishes it if you think about Seattle or some of these other scenes that came along. What can we do to have more kids and teenagers become songwriters? How can we help build that level of the ecosystem that then feeds the bands and feeds the live scene?
I think Girls Rock is doing a good job at that.
Shout out to Girls Rock. That's a great organization.
There's some gentlemen here from Guitar Center, and you may or may not be familiar with, but they've got a program where just the kids coming in to learn instruments. They help them book gigs. One of the things we're doing this summer, they're completely running our outdoor stage at First Friday Food Truck Festival. They're going to have 3 local bands every Friday, and it's not just the playing; it's playing, tech, sound check, the whole 9 yards. So it's a great thing that these guys are doing, and I didn't know about it until this year. So there's lots of opportunities out there. You just got to find them.
What about schools? How could schools encourage this kind of creativity?
I mean, there's a lot they could do. I think that the Symphony, we have the Metropolitan Youth Orchestra, and we actually pair kids with their parents to help learn instruments, and we have 100% high school graduation rate, and we've had some kids who have gone on to Juilliard and are now performers or teachers, or have even come back and gotten involved with the program. But I mean, from an education standpoint, we have to make sure that music stays in our schools, and I mean that's another loaded question for probably a whole other panel.
So I'll go at it from a different point of view. I think education in schools is obviously important. And down in Bloomington, we work with an artist named Joshua Bell, who when he was 7 or 6 or something like that, had a whole culture around him of great teachers. And he was able to tap into that and become a superstar at the violin. But aside from educating kids at that level in classical, and ISO is doing great work, I think there comes a point where there's plenty of talent and you get to be in high school or going into college, and the question is there a cool enough supportive music community that when I keep talking about that spark occurs? And I'm gonna go back to the 80s. Is Bob McCutcheon back there? Okay, so Bob was mentioned because he runs the Nickel Plate Amphitheater, and he said this year he's going to up the ante and bring in some real cool acts. Can I mention who you mentioned? Houndmouth? I mentioned it. And some other acts that would compete directly with some of Live Nation's bookings, perhaps free shows, but it's funded by the city. But Bob managed my first band. We were called The Sound, and then East of Eden. And he was there as a person in the music community that took us out to LA and co-managed us with Vicki Hamilton, who was managing a band called Guns N' Roses. So I just gave away my age. But Bob and that whole community, she was from Indiana too, was there. Now, we didn't make it, but it sort of started my interest in music, and I ended up being a music lawyer. And it was, even before that, there was, remember, some of you, this is really dating me, remembers Head East and Roadmaster. And there was a scene where you would go out and see live music, and you would say, I want to be a rock star, sort of the Almost Famous feeling. Then there was Henry Lee Summer and Y Store, and in the indie rock thing through the 80s and 90s. And we've got to cultivate that whole scene so that when these kids come up and they've got talent, they're supported. And there's no magic bullet answer, but this community of people coming together and discussing this is so important, so that when that spark happens and Live Nation puts them on an opener and they get seen, they get a record deal, they have everybody supporting them. I think you can create all these things and then hope for the best. And if you don't have these supports, the Bob McCutcheons out there and the people supporting these artists, then it's unlikely that this scene will turn into anything more than it has been.
That's great. One final, any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, thank you guys for being here. My name is Mariah Ivy. I'm a hip-hop and neo-soul artist, poet, and my band is called Tribe Soul. For those artists who have been in the city, I think there are two challenging issues, one being access and one being awareness.
Start again.
Start all over. My name is Mariah Ivy. I'm a hip-hop, neo-soul artist and poet, and I lead a band called Tribe Soul. For the artists in the city, I think there are two challenging issues sometimes. One is access and one is awareness. In terms of access, I think a lot of artists have a lot of great ideas, and there's some extremely talented artists coming out of the city, but they don't always have the money for some of the venues. I think affordability is an issue sometimes. And then in terms of awareness, I think there's a disconnect between some of these great artists and then some of you who have, who can make those decisions and open their spaces and, the recording studios. How do we bridge those gaps, especially for artists of color? I think we are left out of the equation a lot of times as well. So in terms of just bridging that divide in the city, how can we improve on access and affordability or awareness?
I think that's a great question, and I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I think Trees is a piece of that, like the Hip Hop Festival. One of Musical Family Trees, they stopped doing this last few years, but they used to do a new music showcase every year, and that was my favorite event of the year, because you'd go to Radio and White Rabbit, and you would just listen to new bands that had come out in the last 12, 18 months, giving them a platform to connect with a new audience and to sort of show that they had the stuff to get to that next level, which is like, okay, now they're opening up for a bigger band, whatever it might be. I think that we need institutions like that. I'm calling it an institution of like a platform. Back in Bloomington, when I worked at Second Story, we had $1 Thursdays, where I would just do $1 cover. Bands would come in, they didn't get paid a lot, but they got exposed to a new audience. I think there's opportunities to do that as well. That creates access. But I think also the idea of having that live music czar, somebody that can be that full-time person whose job is to be that point of contact. So I think a lot of times you don't know who to go to. Who do you talk to? And you need a front door. And right now I don't think there is a front door for the music community. And there's a lot of people you can talk to that might kind of say yes or no, but we need more visibility, I think, as a front door.
I mean, I think having a good all-ages space is a big component of that too. Like something where the threshold to play is really, really low. You know, like all you have to do is go in and ask, and they'll put you on the bill. You know, when I was in high school, there was this place called the Festivilla, and you know, I went in there when I was like, I think I was 14 when the first time I played a show there. You know, and that was huge in like developing me, you know, as like a musician and a lover of music.
I would just add, just by showing up, you made the first step, and if you're not grabbing everyone's business card after this seminar, then you should do that.
Well, okay. All right, any other questions? I've got a final question to ask the group if I don't have one from the crowd. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are kind of hinting at it here with the, especially with Carl and Robert's last couple comments. I love the concept of providing the infrastructure so that when there is that creative spark, things can go to say Walk the Moon level or super breakout hit. I'd love to hear you guys talk also about cultivating the non-professional sort of music ecosystem within the city, that the people who, like Robert or many of up there started out as performers but have sought other employment, in or outside of the music industry, but are still active in the scene and have no intention of going on tour or traveling cities, but want to be active in the local scene.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that in the back. There's all sorts of different career paths, and not everyone wants to go ahead and go from local to international superstars. Some guys are just happy being in bands, just playing on the weekends. It's a hobby, it's not a career. Some people can make a career out of it. First it's recognizing it yourself, and like I said, there's 20, 30 venues outside of the hard ticket venues in the marketplace, and that'd be a great thing to add to this discussion is what is that who are those booking agencies that kind of live in that world. I think there's a few in Indy, but honestly it's really not my world. So if you're looking for a show at the Ale Emporium, I have a friend that plays there and I go see him play some great covers, but I couldn't even tell you who he speaks to, but that should be something on the agenda.
I think just real quick, I know Musical Family Tree is specifically built to serve that artist, like the artist that records in their bedroom and plays one show a year. I mean, and then works a job, or all the way up to the artist that's hustling and touring, as Oreo's done quite a bit, and building something. Sort of everyone in that sort of sub-major label zone that's in that hobbyist level to semi-professional. I think that there's a need in the ecosystem. This gets back to mapping the ecosystem, which he identified in that slide that we haven't really done yet, and saying, where are we healthy, where are we weak, where do we need to bring more resources so that we are really serving all of these people, because you're right, it's a life cycle. In my 20s, I wanted to be a rock star. There's no way in hell I'd tour now. I wouldn't survive. So you go through changes with life, and I think that the ecosystem needs to support that.
One thing I would say is that we've talked a lot about supporting the artists, but there is this, and you mentioned, Carly, you haven't signed a lot of Indianapolis artists, but you have hired a lot of Indianapolis employees over the years. And I don't know how many people are now working for you.
I think we have 10.
Yeah, and my law firm has about 5 or 6, and secretly down in Bloomington has like 80. It's one of the largest indie labels. So, and the ISO has 75 musicians or more, but how many non-musicians?
55, and the arts actually employ over 14,000 people in Indianapolis.
Yeah,
full-time.
so just in music and these things we've mentioned, that is part of the ecosystem in a big way, and it's fun to be part of it, and it pays the bills. And so this isn't just about the musicians, although they're kind of the gods in my eyes because they're the people who create the art. But we support it, and we're important as well around the outside, and there are jobs that we can build on to build that community up.
All right, we got to wrap up. Thank you very much for listening to us chat, and time for lunch.